My name is Naomi, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I would lose everything I had built over 35 years in just one night. The house where my late husband and I raised our son, where every corner held precious memories, where I thought I would live out my golden years in peace. That house is gone now, reduced to ash and charred memories. But what happened next, when I turned to my own family for help, shocked me more than watching my home burn to the ground. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. You will not believe what my own family did to me when I needed them most. 2 years had passed since I buried my beloved husband Robert, and I had slowly learned to navigate life alone in our family home. The mornings were still hard brewing coffee for one instead of two, but I had found my rhythm. I spent my days tending to the garden Robert had loved, reading mystery novels on the front porch swing, and cooking extra portions for my elderly neighbors who appreciated a warm meal. My relationship with my son Marcus had grown somewhat distant since Robert's passing. At 42, Marcus was busy with his own life, managing his accounting firm, and raising two beautiful children with his wife Stephanie. 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Tyler were my pride and joy, though I noticed Stephanie seemed less enthusiastic about our family visits lately. When I would call to arrange time with my grandchildren, there was always some excuse: soccer practice, birthday parties, or simply that the children were too tired. I attributed it to the busy life of a young family and tried not to take it personally. That fateful Tuesday night started like any other. I had made a pot of vegetable soup and taken some to Mrs. Patterson next door, whose arthritis had been acting up. We chatted about the upcoming spring planting season before I returned home around 9:30. I settled into my usual evening routine of reading while listening to classical music, something that brought me comfort in the quiet house. I fell asleep in my reading chair around 11, which had become a common occurrence since Robert's death. The house felt too quiet for the bedroom we had shared for so many years, but at exactly 2:47 in the morning, I was jolted awake by an acrid smell that made my nose burn. Smoke. Thick, choking smoke was seeping under the living room door. My heart pounded as I stood up, immediately disoriented. The smoke was getting thicker by the second, and I could hear a crackling sound coming from somewhere below. The basement. Oh no, the old electrical system Robert had always meant to update. I grabbed my phone from the side table and dialed 911 while stumbling toward the staircase. 911, what is your emergency? My house is on fire. I gasped into the phone, coughing as the smoke grew denser. The address is 1426 Maple Street. Please hurry. The operator stayed on the line, instructing me to get out immediately, but I could not leave everything behind. In those precious minutes before the fire spread upstairs, I managed to grab our wedding photo from the mantel, the box of family pictures from the hall closet, and Robert's wedding ring, which I had kept on my nightstand. Everything else, 35 years of memories, would have to stay behind. I stood on the front lawn in my nightgown and slippers, clutching those few precious items, watching orange flames lick at the windows of my home. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside me in her robe, having called the fire department as well. She wrapped a blanket around my shaking shoulders as we watched the firefighters battle the blaze that was consuming everything I had left of my life with Robert. The fire chief approached me around 5 in the morning, as the last of the flames were extinguished. "Ma'am, I am sorry, but the house is a total loss. The fire started in the basement electrical panel and spread too quickly for us to save much of the structure. Do you have somewhere to stay?" Mrs. Patterson immediately offered her spare bedroom, bless her heart. As we walked to her house, I realized I needed to call Marcus. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, knowing he would be asleep with his family. "Mom, what time is it? Is everything okay?" "Marcus, honey, I need to tell you something terrible has happened. The house burned down tonight. Everything is gone." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought we had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strange, distant somehow. "Oh my God, Mom. Are you hurt? Where are you now?" "I am staying with Mrs. Patterson for now. But Marcus, I am going to need help figuring out what comes next. The insurance company will not be able to meet with me until Thursday, and I have nothing left except the clothes on my back. Another pause. Then Marcus said the words that should have comforted me, but somehow did not. Of course, Mom. We will figure this out. I will call you tomorrow after I talk to Stephanie about the best way to help. After I talk to Stephanie. Those words echoed in my mind as I tried to sleep in Mrs. Patterson's guest room. Why did he need to consult his wife about helping his own mother in a crisis? But I pushed the thought away, telling myself I was being oversensitive after such a traumatic night. The next morning, Mrs. Patterson took me shopping for basic necessities. We bought a few changes of clothes, toiletries, and undergarments at the local department store. I felt like I was shopping for someone else's life, picking out items I had never chosen before, because all my familiar things were gone. The simple act of choosing a new toothbrush felt overwhelming. Wednesday passed in a blur of phone calls with the insurance company, providing them with what documentation I could remember, and trying to process the magnitude of my loss. Every time I thought about calling Marcus, I hesitated. Something about our conversation the night before had left me uneasy, but I could not put my finger on what exactly bothered me. Thursday morning, Marcus called and asked to meet me at Riverside Diner for lunch instead of coming to Mrs. Patterson's house. This struck me as odd, but I agreed, grateful to see my son and discuss practical matters about my living situation. I assumed we would talk about me staying with his family while I worked with the insurance company and looked for a new place to live. I arrived at the diner early, choosing a quiet corner booth and ordering coffee while I waited. When Marcus walked in, I noticed immediately that something was different about his demeanor. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact as he slid into the seat across from me. We had always been close even after Robert's death, so this distance felt foreign and hurtful. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, but even his concern sounded rehearsed. "I am managing, but Marcus, I need to discuss what happens next. Mrs. Patterson has been wonderful, but I cannot impose on her indefinitely. I was hoping I could stay with you and Stephanie while I get back on my feet. Just temporarily until the insurance money comes through and I can find a new place." Marcus shifted in his seat and began fidgeting with his napkin. "Mom, I talked to Stephanie about this, and she thinks it might not be the best time for you to stay with us. The kids have been acting up lately, and she is really stressed with her new job at the marketing firm. She feels like having a house guest right now, even family, would be too much for her to handle." I stared at my son, unable to process what he was saying. "Marcus, I am not a house guest. I am your mother. My house just burned down. I lost everything. I know that Mom and I am sorry, but Stephanie is concerned about boundaries and maintaining the stability of our household routine. She thinks having you there might disrupt the children's schedule and add stress to an already difficult time for our family." Boundaries. The word hit me like a slap. I was being discussed as if I were some problematic relative who might overstay my welcome, not a woman who had raised the man sitting across from me and loved his children as my own grandchildren. "I would help with Emma and Tyler," I said, trying to keep desperation out of my voice. "I could cook meals, help with homework, do laundry. I would not be a burden, Marcus. I would contribute to the household while I figure out my next steps." Marcus looked down at his hands. "She also feels like you tend to be a little too involved sometimes, Mom. She wants to make sure the kids see her as their primary caretaker, not their grandmother." Too involved. I felt my chest tighten as I remembered all the times I had babysat when Marcus and Stephanie wanted date nights, all the birthday parties I had helped plan, all the bedtime stories I had read. Since when was loving my grandchildren considered being too involved? "What exactly did she say about me, Marcus?" He would not meet my eyes. "She just thinks it would be better for everyone if you found alternative arrangements. Maybe that nice assisted living place on Oak Street, or there is a comfortable motel on Route 12 that offers weekly rates." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but I barely heard the rest. My son, the child I had rocked through fevers and cheered at baseball games, the young man I had worked 3 jobs to put through college, was suggesting I live in a motel because his wife found my presence inconvenient. When he pulled out his wallet and tried to hand me $300 to help with motel expenses, I stood up from the table. "Keep your money, Marcus. I will figure this out on my own." I walked back to Mrs. Patterson's house, in a daze, feeling more alone than I had even after Robert died. At least when my husband passed away, I still had my son. Now I was beginning to wonder if I had lost him too. That evening, as I sat in Mrs. L. Patterson's living room staring blankly at the television, I decided I needed to understand what was really happening in my family. Something about Marcus's behavior felt wrong, scripted somehow, as if he were repeating words that were not entirely his own. I had raised that boy, and the person sitting across from me at lunch today was not the son I knew. I waited until Friday evening when I knew Stephanie would be at her book club, then called Marcus's house. 8-year-old Emma answered the phone with her usual cheerful voice. "Hi, Grandma Naomi. Daddy said your house burned down. Are you sad?" "Yes, sweetheart. I am sad about the house, but I am happy to hear your voice. How are you doing in school?" "Good, I got an A on my spelling test. But Mommy said I should not talk about you at school anymore because it makes Daddy sad." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, honey?" "Mommy said you are mean to Daddy, and that talking about you makes him remember sad things. She said good little girls do not make their daddies sad by talking about people who are not nice." I gripped the phone tighter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emma, did Mommy say anything else about Grandma?" "She said you try to tell Mommy and Daddy how to raise us, and that is not your job anymore because you are old. She said old people sometimes forget their place and try to boss around the people who are really in charge." Each word felt like a knife. Stephanie had been poisoning my grandchildren against me, feeding them lies about my character and my intentions. I managed to end the conversation without letting Emma hear the devastation in my voice. But after I hung up, I sat in Mrs. Patterson's guest room and cried harder than I had even while watching my house burn. The next morning, Mrs. Rodriguez from Marcus's neighborhood called me. She had heard about the fire through the local grapevine and wanted to offer her condolences. During our conversation, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Naomi, I hope you do not mind me saying this, but I was surprised by some things Stephanie said at the playground last month. She was talking to some of the other mothers about you, saying you were becoming difficult to deal with and that she was worried about your mental state after Robert passed away." "What exactly did she say, Maria?" "She told the other moms that you had been calling constantly, trying to interfere with how they raise Emma and Tyler. She said you criticized their parenting choices and tried to undermine her authority with the children. She also mentioned that you had been acting strangely since Robert died, making inappropriate demands on Marcus's time and emotional energy." I had made perhaps 5 phone calls to Marcus's house in the past 6 months, and I had never once criticized Stephanie's parenting, at least not directly to her face. The accusations were complete fabrications designed to paint me as an overbearing, mentally unstable widow who needed to be managed and controlled. "Maria, did she say anything else?" "She mentioned that she was concerned you might try to guilt Marcus into supporting you financially or emotionally in ways that would not be healthy for their marriage. She said she was trying to help him establish appropriate boundaries before you became too dependent on them." After I hung up with Mrs. Rodriguez, I called my sister Sarah in San Diego. Sarah was 4 years older than me and had always been perceptive about people's motivations. I told her everything that had happened since the fire, including the strange lunch with Marcus and Emma's comments about what Stephanie had been telling the children. "Naomi, I have to tell you something I probably should have mentioned before," Sarah said. "About 6 months ago, Stephanie called me out of the blue. She said she was worried about your mental health after Robert died and asked if I had noticed any signs of depression or cognitive decline when we talked." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you seemed to be grieving normally and that you had always sounded perfectly lucid and independent when we spoke. But she kept pushing, asking if you had been making unreasonable demands on Marcus or trying to insert yourself inappropriately into their family decisions." "And what did you say to that?" I told her I had no idea what she was talking about, that you had always respected their privacy and autonomy as parents. But Naomi, she said something that really bothered me. She said she was trying to prepare Marcus for the possibility that you might need to be placed in some kind of supervised care situation, and she wanted family members to understand that this decision would be in your best interest. The pieces were falling into place. Stephanie had been laying groundwork for months to isolate me from my son and grandchildren. She had been spreading false narratives about my mental state, my behavior, and my intentions. The house fire had simply provided her with the perfect opportunity to push Marcus toward cutting off contact with me entirely. I spent that night awake staring at the ceiling and trying to understand why Stephanie would want me out of their lives. I had never been anything but supportive of their marriage, helpful with the children when asked, and respectful of their decisions. But I realized that none of that mattered. Some people simply cannot tolerate sharing influence or attention, even with family members who pose no real threat to their relationships. By Sunday morning, I had made a decision. I was not going to let Stephanie win this battle for my son's loyalty, and I was certainly not going to allow her to poison my grandchildren against me without a fight. It was time to confront this situation head-on, even if it meant risking what little relationship I had left with Marcus. Monday afternoon, I waited across the street from Marcus's house until I saw Stephanie leave to pick up the children from school. I knew this would give me about 45 minutes alone with my son, enough time to present the evidence I had gathered about his wife's systematic campaign to turn him against me. I walked up to the front door of the house I had visited countless times over the years and rang the doorbell. When Marcus answered, his face immediately showed surprise and discomfort. "Mom, what are you doing here? I thought we agreed that you would call before coming over." "When did we agree to that, Marcus? And why would I need permission to visit my son's home?" He stepped aside reluctantly to let me in, but his body language remained tense. We sat in the living room where I had played with Emma and Tyler just months earlier, though now it felt like enemy territory. "Marcus, I came here because I have learned some very disturbing things about what Stephanie has been saying about me to other people, including our own family members." "Mom, I really do not think this is a good idea. Stephanie will be home soon with the kids, and she is already stressed about work. Having this conversation here will just create more tension. So we can only discuss your mother when it is convenient for your wife, Marcus. Do you hear yourself right now?" I proceeded to tell him about my conversation with Emma, about Mrs. Rodriguez's revelations, and about Stephanie's phone call to Sarah. With each piece of evidence I presented, Marcus's face grew more troubled, but he continued to defend his wife. "Mom, maybe you misunderstood what Emma said. Kids sometimes mix up stories or repeat things they heard on television. And maybe Stephanie was just trying to understand your emotional state after Dad died because she was concerned about you. Marcus, your 8-year-old daughter told me that her mother called me mean and said I try to boss you around because I am old and have forgotten my place. Those are not words that come from television. Those are Stephanie's exact words being repeated by a child." Before Marcus could respond, we heard the front door open and Stephanie's voice calling out that she was home with the children. Emma and Tyler ran into the living room and stopped short when they saw me sitting there. Emma immediately looked nervous, glancing between me and the doorway, where Stephanie appeared moments later. "What is going on here?" Stephanie asked, her voice sharp with accusation. "Stephanie, I came to talk to Marcus about some concerning things I have learned about conversations you have been having about me with other people. I have no idea what you are talking about, and I do not appreciate you coming into my home and making accusations. Your home. This is my son's home too, and these are my grandchildren. I have every right to visit my family. Actually, you do not have the right to show up uninvited and ambush us. This is exactly the kind of inappropriate behavior I have been trying to protect my family from." The argument escalated quickly from there. Stephanie denied every accusation I made, claiming I was paranoid and creating drama where none existed. She accused me of trying to manipulate Marcus by using guilt about my recent loss, and she suggested that my grief over Robert's death had affected my judgment and perception of reality. "You have been calling, constantly criticizing how we raise our children, and making demands on Marcus's time that are simply unreasonable for a grown man with his own family responsibilities," Stephanie said, her voice rising. "That is a complete lie, and you know it. I have called your house perhaps 5 times in the past 6 months, and I have never once criticized your parenting. You criticized the way I handled Tyler's tantrum at Christmas dinner. You undermined my authority by giving Emma candy after I said no. You constantly offer unsolicited advice about everything from their bedtimes to their diet choices. Marcus sat between us, looking increasingly distressed as the argument continued. I could see that Stephanie's version of events had become his reality, and that my attempts to defend myself only made me look more unstable and defensive in his eyes. Then Stephanie made a fatal mistake. In her anger and frustration, she said something that revealed the truth behind her campaign against me. I have been trying to protect this family from your toxic influence, Naomi. Marcus is finally building a healthy, independent life, and I will not let you drag him back into the dysfunctional patterns of his childhood. What dysfunctional patterns? I asked. I gave that boy nothing but love and support his entire life. You made him responsible for your emotional needs instead of developing your own independence. You guilted him into staying close to home for college, you manipulated him into moving back here after graduation, and now you expect him to take care of you in your old age instead of building his own family legacy. None of this was true, but I could see from Marcus's face that he had heard these accusations before and had begun to believe them. Stephanie had rewritten the history of my relationship with my son, painting my love and support as manipulation and control. Marcus, I said quietly, you chose to stay close to home for college because you wanted to help care for your father when his health began declining. You moved back here because you wanted to start your accounting practice in a community where you had connections. And I have never once asked you to take care of me financially or otherwise. But the damage was done. When Stephanie began crying and told Marcus that if he did not ask me to leave immediately, she would take the children and go stay with her sister indefinitely, I knew I had lost. Marcus chose his wife, just as Stephanie had known he would. Mom, I think you should go. We can talk about this later when everyone has had a chance to calm down. I looked at my grandchildren, who were watching this entire scene with frightened, confused expressions. Emma looked like she wanted to come to me, but Tyler was holding back, clearly uncertain about what he was supposed to feel about his grandmother in this moment. Goodbye, Emma. Goodbye, Tyler. Remember that Grandma loves you very much no matter what anyone tells you. I walked out of that house knowing that Stephanie had won the battle for Marcus's loyalty, at least for now. But as I made my way back to Mrs. Patterson's house, I realized that losing that battle might actually be the beginning of my victory in a much larger war for my own independence and self-respect. That night, I sat down with a pad of paper and began making lists. First, I wrote down everything I had lost in the fire and everything I would need to rebuild a life from scratch. Then I made a list of my financial resources, including the insurance settlement I would eventually receive. Finally, I made a list of opportunities that I had never pursued because I had always prioritized being available for my family. The insurance adjuster had already given me a preliminary estimate of $230,000 for the house and contents more than enough to purchase a modest home or apartment anywhere I chose to live. For the first time since Robert's death, I began to consider the possibility that I was not limited to staying in the same town where I had always lived. I called Sarah the next morning and told her about the disastrous confrontation at Marcus's house. Instead of offering sympathy, Sarah surprised me with a suggestion that changed everything. Naomi, why do not you come stay with me for a while? I have a guest house behind my main house that has been empty for months. You could take some time to figure out what you want to do next without having to deal with Marcus and Stephanie's drama every day. Sarah, I could not impose on you like that. You would not be imposing. I would love the company, and San Diego might be exactly what you need right now. The weather is beautiful year-round. There are plenty of activities for people our age, and you would have space to heal and decide what kind of life you want to build for yourself. The more we talked, the more appealing the idea became. I had never lived anywhere but the small Midwestern town where I was born, married and raised my family. The thought of starting over somewhere completely new was both terrifying and exhilarating. Over the next few days, I researched San Diego and discovered opportunities I had never imagined. There were photography classes at the community college, something I had always wanted to pursue, but had never had time for when I was caring for Robert and helping with the grandchildren. There were hiking groups for seniors, volunteer opportunities at local museums, and even part-time job possibilities if I wanted to stay active in the workforce. Most importantly, there were communities of people my age who were building new lives after lost divorce, or simply the desire for adventure in their later years. I would not be an anomaly or a burden. I would be someone starting fresh with the wisdom and resources that come from decades of life experience. The insurance settlement came through faster than expected, and by the following Friday, I had purchased a one-way ticket to San Diego. I arranged for a moving company to pack and ship what few belongings I had acquired during my stay at Mrs. Patterson's house, thanked my generous neighbor for her kindness, and prepared to leave the only home I had ever known. But before I left, I wrote a letter to Marcus. I spent hours choosing my words carefully, trying to express my love for him and my disappointment in his choices without attacking Stephanie or creating more drama for his family. I wanted him to understand my decision to move away, and I wanted to leave the door open for future reconciliation if and when he was ready to repair our relationship. The letter explained that I was moving to California to start a new chapter of my life, that I held no grudges against him or Stephanie, and that I would always be available if he ever wanted to rebuild our connection on healthier terms. I also included my new contact information and expressed my hope that someday Emma and Tyler would be allowed to know their grandmother as the loving, supportive person I actually was, rather than the villain Stephanie had painted me to be. I left the letter in Marcus's mailbox the morning I departed for the airport, not because I was being secretive, but because I wanted to avoid another confrontational scene that would benefit no one. As my plane lifted off the runway, and I watched the familiar landscape of my former life disappear below the clouds, I felt something I had not experienced in years: complete freedom to choose my own future. 6 months later, I was sitting on the small patio of my rented apartment in the Hillcrest neighborhood of San Diego, editing photographs I had taken during a hiking trip to Torrey Pines State Natural Reserve. The photography class at the community college had reignited a passion I thought I had lost forever, and my instructor had encouraged me to enter some of my landscape shots in a local amateur photography contest. My new life had exceeded every expectation I had dared to have when I made the decision to leave everything behind. The hiking group I had joined met twice a week, and I had made genuine friends with people who appreciated my sense of humor, my cooking skills, and my willingness to try new adventures. At 68, I had learned to use a smartphone camera, joined a book club that actually read books I enjoyed, and volunteered at the San Diego Natural History Museum, giving tours to school groups. Most surprisingly, I had discovered that I did not miss the constant worry about Marcus and his family that had consumed so much of my emotional energy for years. Without the ongoing stress of trying to maintain relationships with people who did not seem to want me around, I had mental and emotional space to focus on my own interests and well-being. That evening, as I was uploading photos to my laptop, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number the first time he had contacted me since I left town. My hands trembled slightly as I answered, unsure what to expect. "Mom, it's Marcus. I got your letter, and I know it has been a long time since we talked." "Hello, Marcus. How are Emma and Tyler?" "They are good, Mom. Growing fast. Emma is doing well in 3rd grade and Tyler just started kindergarten." He paused, then continued with obvious difficulty. "Mom, I owe you an apology. I have been thinking a lot about everything that happened after your house burned down, and I realize I handled things very badly." "What made you start thinking about it?" "A few things. Emma keeps asking why you moved so far away, and when you are coming back to visit. And my coworker Jim went through something similar with his mother-in-law and his wife, and hearing him talk about it made me realize some uncomfortable truths about my own situation." We talked for over an hour that night. Marcus admitted that he had begun to see the patterns of manipulation and control in his marriage that extended far beyond the way Stephanie had handled the situation with me. He told me about arguments they had been having over his friendships, his work schedule, and even his relationships with his own siblings. "I think I was so focused on keeping peace in my marriage that I stopped questioning whether Stephanie's demands were reasonable," he said. "And I let her convince me that setting boundaries with you was necessary for our family's health, when really she was just trying to eliminate any relationship that might give me perspective on her behavior." "Marcus, I appreciate the apology. but I want you to know that I am not angry with you anymore. Moving to California has been the best decision I have made in years. I needed to learn that I could build a fulfilling life without depending on family relationships that were causing more stress than joy. Are you happy there, Mom? Really happy? Happier than I have been in a very long time, sweetheart. I have made wonderful friends. I am learning new skills, and I wake up every morning excited about the day ahead of me. I had no idea how much I needed this kind of independence. We agreed to stay in regular contact through phone calls and video chats, and Marcus promised to work on repairing the damage that had been done to his children's relationship with me. He also mentioned that he was considering marriage counseling with or without Stephanie's cooperation, because he had realized that his current family dynamic was not healthy for anyone involved. 3 months later, Marcus flew to San Diego by himself for a long weekend visit. It was the first time we had spent time together, without the tension and interference that had characterized our relationship for years. We hiked in Balboa Park, visited the zoo, and spent hours talking about his childhood, his marriage, and his hopes for the future. Mom, I had no idea you were interested in photography, he said, as we looked through my portfolio of landscape shots. These are incredible. When did you learn to do this? I took a few classes when you were in high school, but I never had time to pursue it seriously. It turns out I am pretty good at it when I actually have the freedom to practice. Marcus was amazed by how much I had accomplished in less than a year of living independently. He met some of my friends from the hiking group, tasted the new recipes I had learned to cook for my book club potlucks, and saw firsthand that I was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with being needed by my family. I think I always assumed you would be lost without Dad and without being involved in our daily lives, he said on his last night in town. I never considered that you might have your own dreams and interests that you had put aside for decades to take care of other people. Marcus, I love taking care of your father and being involved in your family, but I also love taking care of myself and building relationships based on mutual enjoyment rather than obligation. Both kinds of love are important, and I am grateful to have experienced both. It has been 2 years now since that terrible night when I watched my house burn down and lost everything I thought defined my life. As I sit here in my apartment overlooking the San Diego Bay editing photographs from yesterday's hiking trip to Mount Woodson, I can honestly say that losing everything was the best thing that could have happened to me. The insurance money allowed me to rent this beautiful apartment with a view of the water and enough left over to live comfortably for several years. The photography contest I entered 6 months after moving here resulted in a third-place finish and an invitation to display my work at a local gallery. 3 of my landscape photographs have sold to tourists visiting San Diego, something I never could have imagined when I was spending my days worrying about Marcus and Stephanie's approval. My relationship with Marcus has slowly healed into something healthier than it ever was before. We talk every week via video chat, and Emma and Tyler have begun to see me as their interesting grandmother, who lives near the beach and takes beautiful pictures of nature rather than the difficult relative their mother had painted me to be. Marcus has made progress in his marriage through individual counseling, and while Stephanie and I will never be close, she has stopped actively undermining my relationship with my grandchildren. Last month, Emma and Tyler came to visit me for a week during their spring break. We built sandcastles on Mission Beach, visited the wildlife safari park, and took pictures together that now hang on my refrigerator next to photos of my hiking buddies and book club friends. Emma told me she wants to learn photography when she gets older, and Tyler announced that he wants to move to California when he grows up, because it is more fun than home. But the most important thing I have learned during these 2 years is that independence is not selfish, and starting over is not giving up. When Stephanie refused to let me stay in their home after the fire, she thought she was punishing me and protecting her territory. Instead, she freed me to discover parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. I spent so many years defining my worth through my relationships with other people that I had forgotten who I was as an individual. Now I know that I am someone who loves early morning hikes, who has an eye for capturing the perfect lighting in landscape photography, who can make people laugh with stories about my adventures in learning to use modern technology, and who has the courage to build a completely new life at an age when many people assume their adventures are over. The women in my hiking group range in age from 55 to 78, and most of us are either widowed or divorced. We have all learned that our value does not depend on being needed by ungrateful family members or staying in situations that diminish our spirits. We support each other in pursuing dreams we thought we had lost, and we celebrate each other's victories without jealousy or competition. My friend Dorothy started her own jewelry-making business at 72, after her children suggested she was too old to be creative. Barbara learned to scuba dive at 68, after her ex-husband told her for 40 years that she was too nervous to try adventurous activities. Linda went back to college at 65 to finish the degree she abandoned when she got married, and she graduated with honors last spring. Sometimes Marcus asks me if I ever regret moving so far away from family, and I always tell him the truth. I regret that it took a crisis to show me how much life I had left to live. I regret that I spent so many years walking on eggshells around Stephanie, instead of recognizing that her discomfort with my presence was her problem to solve, not mine. I regret that I did not have the courage to pursue my own interests sooner, because I thought being a good mother and grandmother meant sacrificing my individual identity. But I do not regret leaving, and I do not regret building this new life that belongs entirely to me. Last week I received a phone call from Mrs. Patterson, who told me that the lot where my house used to stand has been sold to a young couple who are planning to build their first home there. She asked if I wanted her to save anything from the old garden that might have survived, and I told her to let the new family start fresh. The past is gone, and that is exactly as it should be. Sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is to show them you do not need them to save you. You can save yourself. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop waiting for other people's permission to live the life you actually want. I am 68 years old. I live in one of the most beautiful cities in America. I have more genuine friendships than I have had since college, and I wake up every morning excited about the possibilities ahead of me. My house burned down. My son's wife refused me, but her rejection pushed me to make a move no one expected, especially myself. The move that saved my life was not toward my family's approval, but toward my own freedom. Have you ever had to start completely over after losing everything you thought mattered? Have you discovered strengths you never knew you had when family members you trusted let you down? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below about times when rejection or crisis led you to unexpected opportunities for growth. Please hit that like button if this story inspired you to think differently about independence and starting over, and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult circumstances. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it is never too late to choose yourself and build the life you actually want. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that sometimes the best chapter of your life begins when you stop letting other people write it for you.